Morning, everyone. I see you all logging on this cold morning. I think it's a pretty good morning to stay inside and have coffee. Even my dog doesn't want to be outside. Good morning. As everyone is logging on, my name is Ivy Frignoca. I'm the Casco Baykeeper with Friends of Casco Bay. We're new to our organization. Friends of Casco Bay has been around for 35 years. We work to improve and protect the environmental health of Casco Bay. Last summer, there was a large release of PFAS into Casco Bay. And after that spill, I wrote a letter to all of you and ensured you that we would work to collect data related to that spill. We would augment the data collection we were already doing, and that we would look to identify efforts to make sure a spill like this never happened again. And that is what today's webinar is about. You'll learn more about the science from first guest, Heather Kenyon, our Science and Policy Associate, and then you'll learn about 3 bills related to preventing future spills of firefighting foam containing PFAS, not only into Casco Bay, but everywhere in the state, from Representative Daniel Ankeles of Brunswick. Without further ado, I'd like to get to interviewing Heather. So Heather,
Maybe.
Good morning. Just for making sure we're all on the same page, would you briefly explain what PFAS is, why it's used, and the problem with these type of chemicals?
Yes, I can. So PFAS is an abbreviation that stands for furan polyfluoroalkyl substances. And that's just a fancy scientific name that describes what they're made of. I think the important thing for people to know is the 2 questions that you asked after that. Why are they used and what are the problems? Well, they're used in so many different ways. They're used in household cleaners, certain types of clothing, certain types of makeup, nonstick cookware, microwave popcorn bags even.
Yeah, that grosses me out.
Everywhere. The list keeps getting longer and I'm like, oh no. And they're used everywhere. The problem is that they don't break down in the environment. And on top of that, there have been studies shown that they have negative health effects. I'll name a couple of those, but there are reproductive effects on women, developmental effects on children, and increased risk of some cancers. So they're not great.
No, they're definitely not great, and they don't break down. Heather, what specifically, when we're talking about Brunswick, we've been talking about AFFF, which I'm sure is another acronym for something like what you just said PFAS stands for. So can you just, again, just in case it hasn't come across people's radar, what is AFFF?
Yeah, it's such a good idea to always break down these acronyms because we tend to use a lot of them. AFFF stands for aqueous film forming foam, which is a mouthful. And so AFFF is easier to say. But it is firefighting foam, essentially.
Okay. So I did a program last winter on PFAS that was pretty deep and sciencey. I went back and listened to it last night and talked about a study we did in 2023, and then highlighted a study that you were really taking the lead on coordinating for 2024 and 2025. In 2023, we reported that we found PFAS at every location. And in addition to our monitoring, there were a few other sites that Bigelow Laboratory for Ocean Sciences, our partner, who I'm just going to call Bigelow to shorten acronyms again or names, monitored around Brunswick Naval Air Station. So I didn't report on that last time. Can you just tell everyone what the results were before the spill for levels near Brunswick Naval Air Station, just generally in relation to other PFAS monitoring?
Yeah, just generally and in simple terms, the levels around the Brunswick Naval Air Station were the highest compared to all the other sites monitored. And that's sites that we monitored and sites that Bigelow monitored in the Brunswick-Harpswell area.
Okay. So as a baseline, the numbers there were higher from the historic use of the property.
Correct.
So in 2024, we began a study of PFAS that was bigger than what we had done in 2023. Can you briefly describe that to people to set the stage for the Brunswick spill and discussing Representative Ankeles' bills?
Absolutely. Bigger is the proper term because I'm going to share my screen and show just how much bigger our study last year and this year really is. So hopefully everybody can see my screen. We are monitoring about 90 sites across Casco Bay. That is a lot of sites. So every black dot that you see here are the sites that are being monitored for PFAS in our partnership with Bigelow. I'm going to zoom in, Ivy, if that's okay,
Yes.
on the Brunswick area specifically. So up right to the right of the title is the Brunswick Executive Airport. And so all of those black dots that you're seeing there are places that we're monitoring.
And Heather, the monitoring, what is the frequency that we're monitoring the sites overall in the study versus what we're doing in the Brunswick area?
Yeah, so when we first designed this study with Bigelow, we were going to do 3 water sampling campaigns over all 90 sites and then a sediment sampling campaign. After the spill happened, we got together with Bigelow and we said, okay, we need to make some changes here to this area and so to the study, I should say. So we are monitoring along with Bigelow the Brunswick area sites specifically more frequently. So right after the spill happened, samples were taken every 2 weeks. And then in February, they're going to go to monthly. On top of that, we also added sites in. So originally we had about 80 sites, 82 sites. After the spill happened, we knew that DEP was obviously there doing their monitoring. And so we called up DEP and we said, hey, we're already there doing this monitoring. Where can we add sites to complement what you're doing? And so we added some additional sites as well.
Great. Thanks, Heather. There's a lot of good questions coming up in chat about fish tissues and monitoring information. So if we haven't done so already, would someone behind the scenes please put in a link to both the Brunswick webpage and DEP where the results of their monitoring is reported. I know our water samples that we collected are still being analyzed up at Bigelow's laboratory that they set up, and that there aren't results ready to be released. But based on preliminary results, what can you say about the study overall? Like, there's 91 sites. Did we find PFAS everywhere?
Yeah, pretty much. PFAS is everywhere. And that's like the thing that people are concerned about. It's everywhere. We know it's higher near land. We know it starts to dilute as you get further out into the bay, but we're starting to understand as well that it's higher in certain areas like Brunswick, and that's really concerning.
Okay, thanks. So for those of you who, like me, really want to know what the data results are, we are going to complete this study this summer, and we'll hold a big program probably late in 2025. Public will be invited. All the data will be publicly available, but we'll also have this scientists there, and you'll have an opportunity to ask all the questions you want about the data and the results of the study. But without further ado, I'd like to turn to our second guest, Representative Dan Ankeles. Dan, as if we're in a public hearing in the legislature, would you please introduce yourself to our audience?
Sure. First of all, Heather, Ivy, thank you, and to all friends of Casco Bay, thanks so much for organizing this. And I see from the attendance thing that we've got more than 100 people here, and I recognize so many Brunswick names, and I can't express enough gratitude for everyone's engagement on this issue. It's really important to our community. So my name is Dan Ankeles. I represent House District 100, which is a central segment of Brunswick that includes the entire bit of Brunswick Landing, and touches a lot of the coast. And I share some of the Cape Furbish Preserve and some of the neighborhoods in uh, southern Brunswick with my colleagues, Representative Cheryl Golick from Harpswell and Representative Poppy Arford from Brunswick. Um, yeah, on August 19th, we got quite a shock.
So would you tell us what happened? Like what?
Yeah.
Describe this spill for us.
Well, there's 151 House districts, and of all the House districts, the worst spill in our history had to happen in the one I happen to represent at this time. So what happened essentially was that due to a glitch in the fire in Hangar 4 on Brunswick Landing, the computer system was somehow convinced that someone had pulled an alarm. And the way the fire suppression system in Hangar 4 works is that even the slightest level of alarm triggers every kind of level of response, including the full fire suppression system. So we had 1,450 gallons of the AFFF concentrate mixed with 50,000 gallons of water, and the result is what you see on your screen. It was everywhere. It got into all of the nearby retention ponds and the groundwater, the soil. It got into workplaces in all over the landing, like where BIW workers are training and building parts for their ships. And it got, and Hangar 4 is the same place where, tech incubators run their businesses, and they all had to get out. And there was, kind of a communications disaster where nobody knew what was going on, and we all had to step in and triage and deal with figuring out all of these unknowns at once. It was really scary for my constituents. It was really scary for the entire region and the Brunswick community.
Yeah, I was going to ask a little bit more about that. Most of us were kind of reading about this in the news, and it was upsetting and scary. But what was it like in the immediate aftermath? Like, what did you hear from your constituents who actually live around the base and were impacted? What were some of the fears or reactions?
People didn't understand whether or not they could even go outside. I had a couple families. There's families with little kids who live right on
Right.
the landing within a few hundred feet of this, and they were like, "Can I even run my air conditioning unit? Will it take in things?" People, like, there was no understanding of what this did to air quality, outdoor air quality, indoor air quality. Could you take a walk? Could you touch grass nearby? What would happen if you approached the foam? What impact would this have on our working waterfront? What impact would this have on people who live on well water? What neighborhoods would this flow toward? Like we had to figure out the the underground geology and the hydrology of the spill. And we discovered that this was headed south-southwest. And so immediately we learn, oh, that's not good because people on Coombs Road have wells, and people
Right.
on Princess Point Road and all of the side roads that shoot off of that road, they have wells. And we didn't even know at first if this would hit the public water system. The one silver lining that we dug right away, and I called Craig Douglas, the executive director of the water district, pretty quickly, and we got the fortunate information that this didn't get into the actual public water supply that was on town water, which, as worried as I still am for all of the residents who are on well water, having it leak into the public water supply would have been even worse. And it would have
Absolutely.
affected a much larger number of people. As it is, the Jordan Avenue well field is for the water district is not in use, and it wasn't in use immediately prior to the spill, and the Navy is building a large PFAS mitigation facility. I think it's to the tune of like $18 million facility to basically protect the Jordan Avenue well field from any future contamination, so that it can be safe to use. But this is, the unknowns,
Yeah, well,
and the
it almost reminds me of when we first were told to quarantine after COVID and we just didn't know. Was it a similar type of feeling for people?
it kind of felt like that, because when you don't know what you don't know,
Right.
you feel a little paralyzed.
Yeah.
And it was up to all of us together, that the town council worked really hard, and to get answers from Mira, to get answers from DEP. And I will admit that uh, it was like, sometimes, especially with Mira, it really was like pulling teeth, to get documentation and information. And there was some dissembling, and
Yes.
we had to cut through a lot of. I'm trying to be diplomatic here, but we had to cut through a lot of resistance to even get the ball rolling on
Get the ball rolling.
a lot of the
So,
pushback and a lot of the response.
just to kind of make sure we're all on the same page, at the Brunswick Naval Air Station, there are two players, the United States Navy and Mira. Can you just briefly describe what the relationship between those two with respect to the former Naval Air Station?
Yeah, it's quite a complicated relationship. Uh, the Navy, as you know, the base has closed, right? And so the Navy has been in a long process of gradually transferring parcels of land to um, the Mid-Coast Regional Redevelopment Authority, or MIRA. And the hangars, 4, 5, 6, and 7, MIRA has already taken possession of hangars 6, 5, and 7. They are leasing / managing hangar 4, and the Navy still owns it, and that's why the Navy, after the spill happened, was able to actually go in and dismantle that fire suppression system's PFAS content, and
Okay.
and take it away. But that hasn't happened in the other hangars, and that would be a good segue later into my one of my bills. So
Yeah, well, that's exactly where I'm going. So one last preliminary question before we segue to your bills. And I know most of you have been following the news, but just in case, just what does MIRA stand for, and what is MIRA? Just
sure. So it's the entity. It's Mid-Coast Regional Redevelopment Authority. Um, it was kind of born from the base closure process, the BRAC process, is for the federal alphabet soup. People who follow.
yes.
And its mission originally is to help with the economic development that was lost by the closure of the base. Right, you have a bunch of employed people in Brunswick doing Navy stuff and powering our local economy. And when a base closes, there's a major economic hole. And this organization was charged with taking this property and repurposing it and reintegrating it in a way that would be economically prosperous for the whole community.
Okay. And as a result of this bill, I know that you are sponsoring 3 bills and working with many other legislatures on other efforts, but can you tell us a little bit about the legislation you're sponsoring specific to MIRA and this
Yeah.
bill?
Yeah, so there's two pieces of legislation. Uh, we've got one of them is mine, one of them is Senate President Maddie Daughtry's, and we worked on them both together. I have LR 102. It doesn't have a full LD number, and there's no link available yet. But I can tell you, because I have the proposed revisions in front of me, that this bill uh, says that no property owned or leased by MIRA, um, at no point can there be storage, um, use, discharge, um, or any other sort of potential activity tied to AFFF foam on property that is owned or managed or leased by MIRA, and that would take effect at the end of the calendar year, to give them time to transition out. And it's a logistical ask of MIRA. It's a financial ask of MIRA. Yes, but I think it's really important to consider how concerned people are about public health, and how concerned people are that this could happen again, even though some of the other hangars are a little bit better positioned not to have accidental discharges in the way that Hangar 4 did. I think people, it's cold comfort for a lot of my constituents, and I think our preference as a community is that this be gone from
Absolutely.
Brunswick, in a way that, of course, is safe and viable for any other place it would go. But it needs to certainly get away from all of these residential areas that we have, and all of these sensitive environmental habitats and working waterfronts.
Yeah, thank you so much for sponsoring that bill. We'll talk a little bit later after we talk about the 3 bills about how you all can get involved in this process. And if you would like to, can support these bills. Um, I read the latest update from the Department of Environmental Protection on the results of their monitoring. And I know there's been a lot in the newspaper, which I've not had a chance to read yet this morning. But when I read the Department of Environmental Protection's latest update, which was released last week, I learned that there's still PFAS that's entering the environment from this spill, which was really made me appreciate even more what you're doing. Like the consequences of this, although levels overall are going down, there's still more PFAS from the spill that's entering the system. And it's really alarming and concerning how long that goes on. Now, this AFFF is the Naval Air Station isn't the only place. It still exists in Maine. And I know as a legislator, you're concerned not just with your district, but in how we can protect all Mainers, and that you have introduced 2 other bills. Can you talk about the 2 other bills that you're introducing relating to AFFF?
Yeah, it's important to just note that what happened in Brunswick shouldn't happen um, anywhere else, even if it's on a smaller scale. Obviously, this was a large amount, but it's really important that we conduct a thorough statewide inventory of all remaining AFFF. And I say remaining because a lot of entities, public and private, have realized that while this is a highly effective fire suppressant, there are alternatives that aren't as poisonous to people and the environment. And there's a lot of people transitioning away, a lot of people who would like to transition away from this, if they were given proper opportunities to do so. So this is a long-term solution. These two bills, they will not be immediate. But what I'm emphasizing here is how important it is to start the process of standing up this infrastructure. So to have a statewide inventory of anything over 5 gallons of this stuff, uh, for both the public sector and the private sector, is highly important. This is LR 100. There'll be a link to this probably within the next week. The text is very close to coming out, but I can safely say that this was a bill I developed with both the DEP and the State Fire Marshal's Office, who the State Fire Marshal's Office would conduct this inventory within a year for public entities and 2 years for private entities. And we expect, the inventory is important because it makes the other legislation about setting up a statewide take back program, which is very much like a product stewardship program. It makes it effective. So the estimate before we even do this inventory is that there could be as much as 50,000 gallons of concentrated AFFF. That's not including any rinsate or anything like that. It could be that much, and so we need to find where they are. We need to make sure the public knows where these large concentrations are, get them engaged, and then pass LD 222, which is that you can have a link to that. That's
Yeah, I
that's
think
real,
we
that's
shared,
a real
just shared a
bill
link in the
with
chat, so go ahead.
and that sets up this take back program over time through the DEP in consultation with the fire marshal's office. And it basically, you set up collection points throughout the state, perhaps using some of the DOT storage facilities that are scattered throughout the state as collection points, like you would a hazardous waste day at your local transfer station, right? And then those would be held, and we still have to talk about, and the DEP will be given latitude with this, but we still have to talk about how this is disposed of in an environmentally just way. We read Penny Overton did and she's on the Zoom, but she did an amazing article about where the spill foam that was cleaned up, like the immediate aftermath, where that went, and it went to vulnerable communities in Canada and Arkansas, and it like they don't deserve it any more than we do. So it's very important that when we set up this program, we make sure that we aren't harming anyone else. And so I will say all of these bills, but particularly the two statewide bills they have costs. But even in a difficult fiscal climate, the silver lining is both bills can be funded with one-time money, not ongoing, because once you take care of some of this, like people aren't acquiring more of this stuff in Maine. I think, I just want to go back to firefighters for a second, because there's documentation about how it sticks to their gear, and they're just this long-term exposure for them, and I really fear for their long-term health, and I want them not to have to. I mean, it's enough that they have to breathe in smoke when they go into an actual fire, and all of the toxins from whatever happens to be burning in that moment. That their equipment should be coated with poisonous PFAS is a little bit of a bridge too far, I think, and I think they've risked enough.
Okay.
So yeah, that's a long answer, but that's where we are.
So of the three bills, one is to first off determine where this AFFF still exists in Maine in quantities over 5 gallons, and then when that is known, then to set up a safe collection system for this hazardous material and a way to safely store it until it can be destroyed.
Yeah.
Those seem like two companion bills. What is your sense of where those will go in the legislature?
Yeah.
You know, I know that bills are heard in particular committees. Do you think those two will go together and be in a particular committee?
Yeah, I mean those bills will both the two statewide bills will both. I mean one of them LD 222 has been referenced to a committee I actually serve on, the Environment and Natural Resource Committee, and both of those bills will go to that committee. The bill specific to Brunswick that I spoke about earlier, we are still figuring out because there are three possible committees it could go to. Because when you tinker with the MIRA statute, it might end up in state and local government. It might end up in housing and economic development. So we're still going to have conversations about where that bill goes.
Okay.
I did want to jump in because I see there's like a bunch of questions popping up in the chat. One point that's sort of related to what I was talking about is people are asking like, are you going to help these communities pay for alternatives? Are you like what are you going to explore how we replace AFFF with something else? And I will say that like I think that's going to be an important point of conversation in the committee process. It's not in the bill right now, but it's something that if people express concerns, if we have public entities express concerns that they would like to transition but are struggling with the fiscal impact, we want to hear that. It may be a multiple step process. What's important to note about the take back program is it's an opt in and it won't go away. So there's not the financial pressure that says you have to do this immediately. But this is something that I do think communities should start planning the fiscal transition as soon as they can,
Yep.
so that in case there isn't the state level funds, we can still work together to move to something else that can be more effective at fighting fires without harming us with long-term public health effects.
Okay. And I'm glad you're jumping to the questions because we have a lot of good questions and I want to get to those while we still have time. But the last, I know we will send out emails to keep all of you who signed up for this program informed about these bills with information about how you can testify in the legislature or submit written testimony. But in addition to that, Representative Ankeles, what can people do to know directly from you the status of these bills and what's going on?
So there's two things, and I'm gonna put a link to this real quick. Two things you can do immediately, which is I would love it if everybody. I'm gonna send
We
this there.
can share your legislative email. We were prepared to do that if that helps, and a link to the
Well,
bill.
I wanted to post. This is a link I've just thrown up. This is the interested party list for the ENR
Great.
committee. I think that's really important. And again, we don't know if everything about this will go to that committee, but if people want to click this link and they get emails and it tells you when the public hearings and the workshops are. The workshops are where we vote on what actually we do with the bills and how we change them. And the public hearings are a chance for you all to submit testimony, whether it's written, whether it's in person, whether it's over Zoom in person. Yeah. So that's one way. The other way is I'm going to toss up my legislative email. Just a second here. And you can just send me a note if you're in the Brunswick area, if you're interested in this issue. I do a monthly newsletter, so I will let people know when any of these bills are scheduled for any kind of public action of any kind, so that people know to contact their my colleagues and yeah.
Great. Okay,
Um,
I'm gonna
I,
get to some of the, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I did want to ask one thing of the team here. Um, would you be willing to copy paste a lot of these questions? So I want to be able to make sure I can read them all because I can't see them. Like there's so many, I can't see them all out, and I want to be able to.
We'll share them with you.
I want to be able to read them after this Zoom is over, so in case I can help answer some of the questions, I can go back and
Great.
contact some of these folks.
We're gonna try to do as much as we can of the questions now, but we'll definitely follow up with you. And I hope you, our guests for coffee this morning, can see how committed Representative Ankeles is and why it's a pleasure to have representatives like him up in the State House. Heather, my first question, I'm going to sort of set the stage here, is for you, but we also have a guest here, Sarah Woodbury from Defend Our Health, who I've seen responding in the chat, who is really sort of one of the leading proponents of making sure that Maine addresses PFAS. So I also would invite Sarah to respond in the chat to some of these preliminary questions. The first one is, why do we continue manufacturing and adding PFOA and PFAS to so many products? And let's just say, why do we keep adding PFAS? Those are two components that have actually been, one voluntarily banned and the other banned, but there's many other PFAS components. So let's just say, why do we keep adding PFAS to products?
It's a great question. And the manufacturers keep adding them because they can. There are thousands of PFAS, and so even types of PFAS chemicals. And so even though some of them have been banned, there are others that are being developed that their manufacturers are using in place of the ones that have been banned.
And
so
we as consumers want them because they do things like make things not stick to our pans. We didn't know it was a dangerous chemical. They make our Gore-Tex waterproof. So it's the property of what it does, right? That is what people want it, or what we as consumers want it, without understanding the risk of it.
That's exactly right. And there are, like you mentioned, Sarah Woodbury from Defend Our Health is working hard on rules so that people in Maine at least can understand what PFAS are in products. And I'm going to rely on Sarah right now to maybe throw up a link to the PFAS in products rulemaking that's happening. Yeah. And Dan, feel free to jump in here if you want to.
I want to add just one thing. We had in our early committee orientation, just within the last week or so, we had interested parties, that's what they call them, come introduce themselves to the members of the committee. I will say there were, as important as it is to, make sure we don't, overly burden the business community, you had industry representatives from every kind of industry. And just my sense of it is that these are folks who will be fighting us every step of the way. These are folks who I'm not sure respect the balance between their profits and the health of their customers. And we need to be on our guard as a committee, that we don't give way too much. It's really important that we do, it's not just about foam. This committee is going to be responsible for all kinds of transitions away from these harmful things. You see the tests that come back from people's septic tanks that had nothing to do with spills, and that is an indication that it is everywhere. Like if people, I think if that it's in sludge, it's like it shows that we all have it
in our dental floss, it's in our dryer sheets, like it ends up in our septic tanks because there's all these things we didn't even know it was in that.
Mm-hmm.
So we can't
Um,
we can't afford to be timid, because we don't want to look back and be like, we could have prevented all of this illness, and deformities, and birth defects, and everything that can cause new parents nightmares, uh, for no reason. So let's really be on our guard here.
yes. Um, this is for both of you. This couple Brunswick specific questions. And we're running short on time. So I'm gonna, how widespread is the spill? I'm just gonna say generally, I would go to the Department of Environmental Protection's webpage to kind of look at that. It is, and Heather, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm just trying to make sure we get to questions, but the highest levels of harm have been closest to the base. It's in the water supply. Is there anything you want to say right now about it? Do we fully know the extent of the spill, or are we still collecting data?
We're still collecting data. We know the highest levels were right near the base because it went into the stormwater system there. And we know that, levels that it went in, that has gotten into Harpswell Cove, and that it got into the Androscoggin River. So it travels, but it's going to take a lot of study to determine the extent.
And it did get into some wells, so that what Representative Ankeles mentioned earlier is true. People are also wondering how we can tell what is legacy and what is from the spill. I know we have a little bit of data from beforehand. Is that something that we may be able to tell?
It's hard to kind of piece that out because there has been so much AFFF use at Brunswick Landing in the past, but that's I'm going to leave that up to people like Bigelow Labs to do that parsing of information.
Okay, and would also say that that's one of the reasons it's so important for organizations like ours and like Bigelow to design long-term studies so that we have some data that is baseline from, God forbid, we never ever want something like this to happen again. That is going to be something we're all working on this year, but to make sure that we have information so that there can be comparisons done.
Right.
We are nearing the end of the time, and a lot of these questions are broader than today's topic, so we can see if we can get some information out there. But I want to turn to Representative Ankeles and just give you the floor for the last moment, just to add any concluding remark.
Yeah, and I'm just scrolling through some of these questions, and please continue to reach out to me. I know, and particularly I saw like Amanda's question about like her blood PFAS level, and we do want to have that conversation at the legislative level about, how do we address people who have PFAS in them, and what we should do in terms of coverage, and like that's going to be a big conversation, and I feel like I do want to take that up with some of our legislative leaders in my office, because when the public health damage has already been done, these bills that I have in front of me, they don't necessarily have an answer for that, and so we're going to have to see what other legislative, the over 2,400 bills have gone in, and
Classic.
my hope is that one of these vehicles might have something to say on this front. And
Okay.
I just want to thank everyone for participating. Encourage you all to stay engaged. This is not going to be a cakewalk. Any of these bills. This is, Mira often pushes back pretty hard, and chemical manufacturers push back pretty hard, and we also have to fight for fiscal priorities with a lot of competing fiscal priorities throughout the state. So there's a lot of resistance that we'll have to overcome to get these over the finish line. But I really hope you'll all join me in this work.
Okay, thank you so much. I know we're out of time. There were a number of good questions also about, is it safe to eat deer meat? Is it safe to consume fish? Those questions are properly directed to Maine's CDC, who we don't do the testing on animal tissues. In our last webinar, we talked about fish advisories. There is a closure in Harpswell Cove that is precautionary. So your questions are super, super important, but that is where to go for that information. Thank you so much for joining us. Please look for the action alerts. Please follow up with us and Representative Ankeles with any other questions, and have a wonderful day and stay warm. Bye, everyone.